Welcome to Rock Center Shorts. Our guest today is Gretchen Carlson. She's an internationally recognized advocate for women's rights whose bold actions against Fox News chairman Roger Ailes helped pave the way for the global #MeToo movement. A journalist, author, TED Talk alum, and champion for workplace equality, Gretchen was named one of Time Magazine's 100 most influential people in the world and is a member of the Time's Up Global Leadership Board. She's a People TV special contributor and host of the new daily news podcast, Get the News with Gretchen Carlson on Quick Media. She's also the author of the New York Times bestseller, Be Fierce, and also Getting Real, and recently co-founded the nonprofit Lift Our Voices to end the silencing of harassment victims through forced arbitration and non-disclosure agreements. And perhaps most importantly, Gretchen's also a Stanford University grad, and we're delighted to welcome you at least back to virtual campus. Thanks so much for taking the time to be with us today.
Well, thank you so much. As I've shared with you, Michael, I grew up in Minnesota, so coming to Stanford was eye-opening in many ways, but especially during February when I could study under the palm tree. So I will virtually put myself back there right now and enjoy that.
Well, I hope some time to welcome you back to campus in person as well. So in our Rock Center work and Rock Center Shorts, we focus on corporate governance. And as part of your work and advocacy, you are focused on a very powerful corporate governance reform. And so for our audience of board members and executives, what do you think needs to change and why?
Yeah, it's a loaded question, but thank you for asking it. So after I came forward with my harassment lawsuit against the CEO and chairman of Fox News, Roger Ailes, 4.5 years ago, I mean, I could have never predicted how any of that was going to turn out just from having the courage to jump off the cliff, first and foremost. But then all of the advocacy work that I would eventually start doing as a result of that. And it really was inspired by the thousands of women and men who started reaching out to me. And it made me realize that harassment in the workplace, gender discrimination, race discrimination, any kind of toxic workplace issue was pervasive in our society. And that most of it was being, quite honestly, covered up through legal maneuvers and contracts and otherwise. And so I decided to start to unravel the very tangled web of how do we fix this? And my husband often jokes with me, you know, how are you more busy now than when you were doing a live national television show on a daily basis and raising 2 kids at the same time? And I'm like, because I'm trying to change the world and I'm trying to make the workplace safer. And with these issues, it's difficult. So I'm going to break it down. First and foremost, there are 2 silencing mechanisms in the workplace that I would love to change. Number 1, arbitration clauses, forced arbitration clauses in employment contracts. This means that if you have any kind of dispute at work, that you will not be given a choice. You are forced into mandatory arbitration, which is a secret chamber, instead of being able to go to an open jury process, which is your 7th Amendment right. So for example, I had an arbitration clause in my employment contract at Fox News. Had my lawyers not figured out a strategy, very highly educated strategy, to sue my alleged perpetrator individually instead of Fox News as a company, we wouldn't even be having this conversation right now, because arguably there wouldn't even be a Me Too movement, because nobody would have known about my story. And so dozens and hundreds and thousands of cases like mine have been going to this secret chamber over the last 20 years instead of being known and out in the general public. Now, I understand from a corporate point of view that maybe that's good. You know, maybe you don't want your dirty laundry out there. However, that's not good for society. And it's not good for women and minorities especially, because we don't actually know how many women have been driven out of the workforce as a result of this. The scary reality, Michael, is that the majority of the women, in fact, I'd say 99.5% of the women who reached out to me, they never work in their chosen profession ever again as a result of this. And I'm not okay with that. And I don't think any corporate leader would be okay with that, because we all want to retain women and people of color. And we all know that all the studies show that it increases our bottom line. So I'm here to help you. I'm here right now to tell you that I have a bill on the Hill. I just testified before House Judiciary last month again, to eradicate arbitration clauses for sexual harassment. It's a 3-page bill, really simple. It's bipartisan. I'm really optimistic that this is going to pass in the next couple of months, and it will be a game changer inside the workplace, because women and men now will be given a choice as to whether or not they want to take their case public, or they want to, in fact, keep it secret. So that is huge. The second way we keep people silent is through non-disclosure agreements. And many people sign on the dotted line. In fact, 1/3 of the American workforce on their first day of employment has signed an NDA, meaning that they can never talk about anything that happens to them. And I'm not talking about proprietary information. Of course, I'm not saying that you should be able to go out and give the recipe for the Big Mac. Of course not. But I'm talking about you should be able to go out and tell somebody that something bad happened to you. For example, I have had movies made about my life now, and I can't even tell you, Michael, whether or not they're accurate. I couldn't participate in them. My family can't tell you.
Because of the agreements you signed.
Because of the agreements that I signed. And had I known at the time, now I signed the second kind of NDA, which was at the end of a settlement agreement. I had both actually, NDA on day of employment, NDA when I signed the settlement agreement. Had I known that my story would help instigate an international movement, I would have fought long and hard to not sign that non-disclosure. But this is the next wave now of this revolution, in that, first of all, women are being believed. Second of all, companies are paying attention to this. Third of all, the American public and media is paying attention to it. And that's moved into, okay, now we need to make change. And so we shouldn't force people into silence through either arbitration or through NDAs. I would say that those are the two major silver bullets that will change the dynamics of these kinds of problems in the workplace. And I would just encourage people who are listening to this to be brave like I was, and to have the courage to be ahead of history on this. Don't wait till I force you to do it through legislation, because I'm pretty determined and I'm gonna do it. So please do this on your own. Some companies already have, and I'd just like to give a shout out to Microsoft and Uber and Lyft and Airbnb and eBay and Google Walkout. That was what this was all about. Facebook, many others have determined that they're not going to force their employees into arbitration. And I just would end on this part of it by saying that the buck stops at the top of every corporation. And we've seen that when you have a predator at the top, it tends to filter down in the people that you hire and the behavior that's acceptable. And if you have a corporate leader who is brave and courageous and sets a tone and a new dynamic of, I'm actually going to celebrate the people who have the courage to come forward. And I'm actually going to allow those women who do to keep working, and I'm going to get rid of the bad people, then that changes everything. So I would just encourage corporate leaders to look at this whole issue 180 degrees in a different direction, because that's the next phase that I'm going to move into after I pass these laws, is how do we better handle these cases then when people do come forward, and not put them off into secrecy and never have them work again.
That's terrific, Gretchen. It's inspiring to hear about the advocacy, not just on the corporate front, but also on the legislative front. And I know from my experience that your message of do this on your own before it comes as legislation will be a compelling one to people in the C-suite and in the boardroom. One last question I wanted to ask. You mentioned the importance of diversity in the work that you're doing. And as you know, given the national reckoning with issues of racial justice and inclusion and the role that corporations play on the front end of that in some ways, could you talk a little more about how your work plays into that dynamic?
Yeah, thanks so much for the question. So, just to go back to what I was saying, that people of color are disproportionately affected by these silencing mechanisms. It tends to be the more disenfranchised groups that fall prey to signing on the dotted line without understanding or having knowledge. So I'm thinking of fast food workers, and I'm thinking, of people working minimum wage jobs. And quite honestly, they can literally not afford to not take, let's say, a severance payment, right, and then sign an NDA because they just can't afford it. So I'm really doing all of my work on behalf of all women from all walks of life and all men from all walks of life and every socioeconomic breakdown, because I have the national platform and frankly the resources to be able to do this on behalf of the millions of other people that don't. And so it would be wonderful if I could one day actually tell you everything that happened to me. I was there 11 years. It'd be a really long book. Yeah. But I'm, that would be fantastic. And mentally, it would probably be good for my mental health as well. But I'm doing this for the millions of people who don't have that platform. And that's why I do say to my husband, if I can accomplish this, this will be my greatest achievement in my life. aside from anything else you read about my resume, and aside from birthing my 2 wonderful children, this will be just monumental because it will affect so many people. And I would just end a little bit more about how important it was for me to create Lift Our Voices as my umbrella advocacy organization, because I wanted to be able to serve all these people who don't have the voice and never thought that they did. And I want to be able to raise money to do more research on this, because we really don't have a lot of research on this issue. And so anecdotally, I can tell you that more people of color are affected by this, but I really want to be able to prove that, because I think it's so much more effective when I can go to corporate leaders and say, you know, you really want to retain these people, and here's how you're not. And here's how many have been affected by it, and here's how we can change it. So it's just one of the areas that we're working on at Lift Our Voices, but education is key. Getting corporations involved, getting on the right side of history, join my mission, and then doing the research, and then also building out curriculum at colleges so that we can inoculate future leaders to not employ these kinds of silencing mechanisms.
Well, that's terrific. And on the education point, I know that my colleagues at Stanford are looking forward to working with you and your organization. And I'll share, as I shared with you privately, Gretchen, that as someone that spent a long time as a general counsel, I've learned a lot from my conversations with you and my studying of the work that Lift Our Voices is doing. And it certainly has changed my perspective, very important perspective on this area. And so I thank you for that. And I really want to thank you for taking the time to join us today on our program and sharing your message and perspective with our audience. Really grateful for your time.
Thank you. And you know what? I just want to say how courageous it is for you to admit that, because this is what I see happening all across the country, is that when I get my message to people, sometimes they don't even realize that what they were doing was harmful. Right. And I've seen change happen right before my eyes, and it's so heartening. And so I welcome anyone who's listening to this that, you know, that they can make that change, and I'll help you. So just come to my website, and it's very simple to take these clauses out. But thank you again for having me, Michael.
Thank you for joining us, Gretchen, and thanks to all of you for joining us at Rock Center Shorts.